story begins in 1884, as delegates from all the great powers of Europe gathered in the grand imperial capital of the German Reich, Berlin. They met to carve up an entire continent. Germany did well out of the scramble for Africa, taking full control of Togo, Cameroon, German East Africa, and German Southwest Africa. But just as Germany was beginning her imperial project, new theories were sweeping across Europe that were to have a powerful influence upon that new empire. Some of the most influential were those of a now forgotten geographer called Friedrich Ratzel.
Friedrich Ratzel was a late 19th, early 20th century German geographer who taught at the University of Leipzig, and he is most famous today for having created Lebensraum theory, the idea that a people or nation must have space, and increasing space as they grow, in order to survive and prosper.
In his book Anthropogeography, Ratzel argued that some of the living space, or Lebensraum, that Germany needed could be found in her new African colonies. And the ideas of men like Ratzel found a ready audience at the time, because behind the grandeur of the Second Reich, Germany's cities had a terrible secret. A population boom had left millions trapped in overcrowded slums and filthy tenements. Berlin itself had become a byword for urban poverty. The German poor had become the Volk ohne Raum, the people without space. And the poor were voting with their feet. During the 1870s, 1.25 million Germans had chosen to leave and become Americans. Seen through Ratzel's Lebensraum theory, Germany now faced the choice of declining through lack of space and the loss of her population, or expanding into new lands. If she could settle her new African colonies with German farmers, these lands would become satellite states that would spread the German race across the world. A greater Second Reich would emerge, stronger and healthier. But only one of Germany's African colonies seemed to offer any real potential for the settlement of farmers and their families. Namibia, or as it was called then, German Southwest Africa. Friedrich Ratzel and other supporters of imperialism promoted Southwest Africa as an ideal source of Lebensraum. It was mainly free of tropical disease, and although much of it was desert, there were huge tracts of land suitable for farming cattle. But by 1903, only 4,000 German settlers had favored Southwest Africa over New York. One reason for the slow pace of colonization was that the land was already the living space of the local African peoples. If the Volk ohne Raum were to find living space in Southwest Africa, like colonists elsewhere, they would have to take that land from the Africans. The best land in the colony belonged to a formidable people called the Hereros.
The Herero of central Namibia had been in contact with the outside world since the early 1800s. They had wagons, their ox wagons. They had a whole section of the society which could read and write. They were extremely well armed with the latest in firearms. These people were not people who were out of touch with what was going on in the rest of the world. They were extremely well connected.
Under the governor Theodor Leutwein, Germany followed a colonial policy of negotiations, treaties and bargaining with the powerful leaders of the Herero and the colony's other tribes. But for many of the settlers who came to German Southwest Africa, the power and influence of the Africans was completely at odds with the racial theories they had brought with them from Europe, and they resented it.
For the settlers that came here, it would have been an unbearable situation, because the reality of Namibia was that they didn't own the land nor the resources. So you have this very strange, almost paradoxical colonial situation where the colonizer comes in and has to rent land and buy cattle from the people he's supposed to be colonizing.
The issue of who was to own the land created huge tensions between the German settlers and the Africans. But what also began to push the two groups towards conflict was that many settlers were so convinced of their own racial supremacy, they began to believe they could treat the Africans with impunity.
Normal Herero people were being made to work for Germans, and they had virtually no recourse to the law to protect themselves when they were abused. So there are very few cases in which Herero people even tried to seek legal redress when they were not paid, when they were beaten, when they were raped, or when someone in their family was killed.
The reputation of German colonial soldiers when it came to the abuse of African women was so bad that it even became known back in Germany, as seen in this newspaper cartoon strip. And as the news of each murder and rape spread among the Herero, they became convinced that they had no option but to resist. They could see that the German settlers were determined to take their land, and to defend it, they began to consider rebellion.
The German settlers want more and more land. They want land, they want it cheaply, and they want it now. And the German soldiers see themselves as the future settlers. They want to become settlers once they've finished their military service. And you have a situation where the German settlers and the German soldiers find one another in their desire for land. And they are opposed in this by Theodor Leutwein, the governor, and by the Herero.
By Christmas 1903, the capital Windhoek was alive with rumors. In the bars, settlers and their allies in the army openly called for a war against the Herero. Governor Leutwein was now the only force in the colony preventing war. But at the exact moment when his cool head was most needed, a minor revolt in the south meant that he and most of the garrison left. The results were disastrous. Within weeks of the governor's departure, the extremists in the army finally pushed the Herero too far. They rose up, and terrible scores were settled as the relatives of Herero raped or killed by Germans took their revenge. In the first few days, over 100 German soldiers and farmers were killed. But the rebellion provided the perfect pretext for the most radical among the settlers and the army to take over the land. They now set about the grim work of ethnically cleansing the colony of the Herero.